So yeah, I'll just welcome everybody. Glad you could join us. My name is Sarah Gladu. I'm the Director of Education and Citizen Science for Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust. And we also have Angela DeVoe. She's with me as sort of my anchor. She's in the office, I think. I can't see you, but I think you're in the office, right, Angela?
I'm in my office.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And she's kind of my anchor. Yeah, in case the phone overheats or I drop it in the mud or something like that, and she needs to take over the hosting of the program for a little bit until I recover. And Hannah McGee is our communications person with Coastal Rivers, and so fortunately she's joined us today as well. This is a very small group at the moment, although I think there were more than a dozen folks registered. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves and chime in at any point or ask questions, please do that. And Angela can let me know if you're putting stuff in the chat or if you're raising your hand, because I have glare on my screen. I can't always see it. Also, I now have mud on my screen, but at any rate. So welcome. I am standing right here on the shores of Great Salt Bay at what is very obviously very low tide, which is exactly what I was looking for, since I can show you something at low tide that are harder when the water's up. And the way you get to the area that I am exploring is you go to the intersection so that you're at the intersection of Route 1 and 215, and you can park right across from the Redemption Center next to Lincoln County News, and there's a trailhead right there, Great Salt Bay Heritage Trail. And that trailhead, I have already come the first little part of it across the planks that go across the salt marsh. We'll visit some of the salt marsh, and I came out to the edge of the bay so we could start here. But the trail is about 3 miles long. We're not going to do even a portion of that, or barely a portion of that, during this program. But if you do the entire loop, it's a lovely 3-mile loop that goes out along the bay. There's a little bridge, and then it goes under Route 1. There's a sheep tunnel, actually, an old sheep tunnel. And you can go under Route 1, and then you go over to Glidden Midden, which is a wonderful site where there are the remains of the Wabanaki people when they were living here on this location were depositing shells, oyster shells, from where they were eating. And so there's ancient mounds of oyster shells there, the Middens, and then the trail comes back on the other side of Route 1 from where I'm standing now. And there's lovely wetlands and some other things, lots of white oaks in there. So it's a great loop to explore. But today I wanted to focus on the shore itself and what is here for us to see. For starters, you should know that Great Salt Bay is a marine protected area. It's actually a specific type of marine protected area. It is a shellfish area, and so what has been prohibited is any disturbance of the benthic environment. That's the muddy bottom, the muddy substrate. So people can't clam here, and they can't put anchors in the mud or structures in the mud. And the reason for that is to protect the nursery grounds for a lot of the invertebrates and other creatures that are living in Great Salt Bay, which is really a nursery habitat for a lot of the rest of the Damariscotta River estuarine system. So there's a 12-mile estuary that goes from here out past Fort Island into the greater Gulf of Maine. And this area right here is a protected area because it is so important and there's such a great diversity of life here. And so it's a pretty interesting area as well. So you won't see clam diggers and you won't see structures, you know, in the mud and so forth. So let's just start looking at things that are out here. I am going to be walking in the mud and traipsing around, so I pardon any heavy breathing or inappropriate language that might happen if I slip in the mud or something like that. But
hey, Sarah.
Yes.
While you're walking, may I just add one or two things?
Yes.
If people are new to Zoom, and you happen to be looking at your screen and everybody's image looks the same size, you'll get a better view of what Sarah's doing if you switch your view to speaker view. You can do that. There's a little icon and on my screen. It's in the upper right-hand corner of my Zoom window. You can toggle back and forth between gallery view and speaker view. So if you're on speaker view, you'll get to see a larger view of what Sarah is doing and looking at.
Thank you so much for adding that, Hannah. And in addition, if you can't see something or want me to show something in a different way, let me know. I actually cannot see you because the way I have my screen set up, I have it so I can see what I'm trying to show you so that I can do that accurately. But be sure and reach out through the chat or raise your hand or speak up so that we can catch your question or comment. So let's just kind of describe the habitat itself here. This is Spartina alterniflora. It's actually right here. You can see these are the flowers of this grass. The very prevalent grass along the shore. The Spartina patens is the finer grass that you can see, and I'll take you around the corner into that salt marsh in a bit, and you'll see that's more prevalent in the salt marsh. But in the intertidal zone, which this essentially is, because the rack line where the ocean water comes up to is up there. So this is covered in water much of the time when the tide is up. And this grass can actually survive the salt water. It has a number of adaptations to be able to do that. Its cells can excrete or keep out the salt itself. And they also have interesting down at the base, these grasses, you can't see them because it's all in the mud, but in the base, there is actually a joint so that when the grass is pushed by the water and flattened, because it gets weighted down by the weight of the water, that the grass wants to stand back up once the water's receded so that it can capture sunlight again. And the joint actually allows the grass to move back and forth as the tide comes and goes. Here we have some ribbed mussels that are stuck right down here in the mud. So there's one that's, I'll give you a different view of that. There's a ribbed mussel. It looks a lot like the blue mussel or even the horse mussel that you might be more familiar with in the open water or what you would eat at the grocery store. These taste like mud. They're not good for human consumption. There's lots of other animals that will eat them, of course. So raccoons will come down at low tide and scavenge for them. They all do have the byssal threads, just like the blue mussels. So this one's probably attached to this rock that's over here. The byssal threads are what it adheres with, because if it didn't have some way of adhering, it might get taken out by the tide. So all this dead grass here that's laying on top of the mud is actually serving a function. It's providing habitat for a lot of different types of algae that are growing right on top of the mud. And this is all eelgrass. We'll find some that's alive as well, but this is all eelgrass that's decaying, and there's a lot of bacteria and algae that's in there as well. I don't think you probably can see it, but there are, or you can't see them, I should say. I don't know. There are tiny little animals scurrying around on the mat of eelgrass. These are springtails. They're related to snow fleas, and snow fleas are what you see congregating in the warm March little patches in the snow. Actually, here's one right on the rock. Can you guys, or a couple, can you see those?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So those are tiny little animals. They have 10 legs actually, and they're scurrying around on the rocks. They're omnivores. They'll eat decaying plants and animals. They're all over here, but they're very, very tiny. there are also some very tiny snails. Let's see if I can show you one right in front of my very dirty now finger. Tiny little snails in here, little periwinkles. So, and here's some bigger ones. This is actually a dog whelk. You can tell that because it's more elongated. It's not the round shape of the periwinkle. This is an omnivore of a snail, and there's quite a few of them in here actually. The omnivores are eating, they will actually drill into small clams and mussels and oysters. So they're omnivores. I'm sorry, they're carnivores. They're eating meat primarily, other animals. The probably more familiar to you are periwinkles. Periwinkles are grazers, and they're eating out here algae primarily, and some of the seaweeds and so forth. There's a very tiny little clamshell. This might have been eaten by one of those dog whelks. Little soft shell clam. Anyway, that's all just standing on the one little rock. I haven't walked around yet in the least. This is just in one little spot. This is what I'm seeing. All right, now I'm gonna try the part where I walk around in the mud. I don't know if you can hear the sucking noises that my shoes are making, but it sounds loud to me. So out here on the mudflats, there are all these little pools of water. This one is, you know, not even the size of a dinner plate. And I can see multiple little dog whelks taking refuge in there. And actually, I see something quite lovely. Right where my finger is, you probably can't tell yet, but see if it moves again. I'm gonna follow it with a stick. Oops, there's a dog whelk on the stick. I'm gonna get a different stick. I don't know if you guys can see that. I'll pick him up. Let's see if you guys can see that. Is that in focus for you? Can you see what's on my hand?
It's a little bit out of focus.
Yeah, it
looks
was
like
focused. Center your hand more in front of the camera. Yeah, that's better.
Oh.
It looks like a little spot of mud.
Huh. It's not. It's a horseshoe crab.
Oh my gosh.
Right where my thumb is a telson, the tail. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm gonna put him back in the water, and maybe you'll be able to see him move around a little bit. Well, not really, because I disturbed the mud too much, the silt. Come here, you. Let's see.
Oh, now I see it.
Can you see that now at all?
Yes.
A little bit. Yeah. Wow.
Cool. So this little guy or girl is like the size of my fingernail, and it's alive. And it's seeking refuge in this nice little, and you can see how well camouflaged it is. It's the color of the mud. So what happens is the horseshoe crabs come inland. Sorry, I should correct that. They come to the shore to spawn, having spent most of the winter probably just in the deeper parts of the estuary. And all spring, May, and June, we see them spawning along the shore and laying eggs in little nests. And the little eggs are the size of the head of a pin. So that little horseshoe crab that you just saw is probably at least a year old. And I don't know if it's the same one, but there's one right here moving around in the mud. I don't know if you guys can see that at all, because he is exactly the color of the mud, or she. So they go through many molts of their exoskeleton as they climb around in the mud. They're eating little tiny marine worms, very small bivalves like tiny clams. And there, you can get a good view of those dog whelks moving around in this pool now too. So everybody likes those little pools of water. Actually, here's another little horseshoe crab in the next door pool of water. It's very hard for me to see, so I'm sure you can't see it. But at any rate, the next little pool of water has another little tiny baby horseshoe crab in it. And I suspect the next little horseshoe crab is in the next pool of water as well. So these little tiny baby horseshoe crabs are living in these pools of water, eating, growing, discarding their exoskeletons. This is a very important nursery ground for those animals as they grow.
Sarah,
Wow, yes.
Somebody is asking how many eggs one horseshoe crab will lay.
Somewhere between 60 and 120,000 per year is the estimate that I've heard. And they don't necessarily lay them all in the same nest. They may lay them in several different nests. Good question. All right. I did lose my shoe, which is why the noise there. All right, I'm gonna walk a little bit after I pull my shoes back on.
How does she lose his shoe? It's really muddy.
Since I'm losing my shoes, I'm actually gonna take my shoes right off. That's not working. Walk this way. So this mud that I'm walking through, it has been, developing here for thousands of years as the tide comes in and goes out, and the animals and plants are growing and decomposing. It's all just substrate it's made up of all that. But here's an exoskeleton. So as they grow, can you guys see that all right?
No.
A little blurry.
Further away or closer?
Well, if you just center it in front of the camera and make it a little larger, it should focus better. Yeah. Whoa, there we go.
All right. So this is the exoskeleton of horseshoe crab, several years old. You can tell it's the exoskeleton because it's that light tan color. When you find ones that are dark colored, they are deceased. And so a predator like a heron or a mink perhaps has come and grabbed it and eaten the insides.
I'll make some calls.
All right, so now walking along the shore here on the edge of the mud, and I've come across these soft-shell clam shells discarded on the shore. So again, a predator has come here, most likely dug up the clams, had a little feast, and discarded the shells. I am going to kind of keep an eye out on the mudflat here to see what tracks we might find, because sometimes we will find tracks, although often they're obliterated in the tide. There are plenty of holes out here in the mud. And so some of these are from marine worms. Some of these are from clams. See what, sometimes you can move, oh, there we go. So I moved this shell of a clam out of the way, and you've got this little tunnel that's been exposed of a marine worm, perhaps a clam worm. Clam worms are very common. They're a polychaete type of worm. They have some bizarre adaptations. They have little frilly looking legs all along their body that they propel themselves and dig with. They have a mouth part that has like a tube with teeth in it. And so they can grab things and chew them up. And they have a very bizarre reproductive cycle. So when a clam worm wants to reproduce, when the adult wants to reproduce, I'm going to look for a few of them. Well, there's their tunnels. Let's see if you guys can you see the tunnels at all in the hole? Oh, there's something. What's that? That's not a clamworm. That's an amphipod. Oh, wait a minute. Let me see. Oh, here we go. This is a clamworm. Okay, this is going to be ridiculously difficult to see, I suspect, but all these animals are the color of mud, not surprisingly. Let's see if I put them on my other hand, right on the wrist. They do bite, but this one's so little, I'm not worried about it. Can you guys see that at all on my wrist, moving around?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a clamworm. It's got many little legs. I'm gonna put him down just because I've got biting bugs on me, and I'm gonna put him on the mud so you can see him go. Let's see, where is he? Oh, there he is. He's spread himself out right on the mud. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, with all his frilly little legs or her frilly little legs. When they want to reproduce, they do a strange thing. They can't reproduce all the time. And so to become reproductive, and because they are externally fertilizing, they actually separate the top of their body from the bottom of their body. And the bottom of their body swims off with the gonads attached and no digestive components. And they go off into the water and release the eggs and sperm and then die. And the top half of the worm has the rest of the worm, parts of it, the digestive parts and so forth. And that part of the worm can continue living. Very bizarre. So what's amazing right here to me is the sheer number of critters in this mud. I mean, I'm looking out. I'm gonna give you can you guys see how many snails, both periwinkles and mostly dog whelks, are littering the mud?
Absolutely.
Could you see that, Angela?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So those animals are, if they're periwinkles, they're grazing, and if they're dog whelks, they're looking for other animals to eat. All right. Let's see what else we can find out here. So I'm approaching the shore itself. Here's the rack line, which is the discarded plant matter. Bunch of horseshoe crab exoskeletons that are here. Lots of isopods jumping around in this muck. This is the high tide line. And we did have some high tides recently with a few days after that full moon. So again, you've got more of this Spartina alterniflora, but then you've got this transition zone. And this bank is pretty much undercut. If you can see the roots hanging out from underneath the bank, that means the bank is undercut and it's eroding. We are losing some of the bank here, unfortunately. The roots are exposed, and that it happens to some extent naturally, but it's also something that can be created by all kinds of anthropogenic kinds of problems, creations. including severe storms. The more severe storms we have, the more erosion we're going to have. So here's the transition zone. We've got some, this is a stump from a white pine and all kinds of creatures that have lived in it, leaving their signs, their woodpecker signs. That big rectangular one, that's from a pileated. The pileated woodpecker is our biggest woodpecker, and they create very large holes sometimes, but they're always kind of rectangle shaped like that. There's also some insect tunnels in here. So the big ones might be from pine borers. You can see this hole down here is about the size of a pencil. So that's most likely a pine borer, which is a long horned beetle that actually can be confused with a very problematic invasive beetle, the Asian longhorn beetle. But the pine one, the local and native pine boring beetle is not so much a problem. And then we've got all these other pines behind it that are still back on the landscape. Lots of mosses, and looks like there's some huckleberries growing back there as well. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Any questions that I should attend to?
No questions in the chat.
Okay. That's fine. I just want to check.
If you can hold the camera a little steadier, I'd be slightly less seasick though.
Not possible, unfortunately, so you'll have to close your eyes.
Okay.
I have to, yeah, I don't know. We're gonna have to figure out a way to deal with that, but ultimately when the bugs are biting and the mud is covering me, it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna go up on the shore here a little bit. Here we have some juniper. This is a low shrub, grows a lot along the shore. It's a good erosion control planting if you're trying to control the erosion. It's also just a lovely shrub, lovely native shrub, although prickly to walk through if you're walking through it. I'm going to go out into the part of the marsh where, just for a few minutes, where there's a different kind of grass that's growing here. It's another salt marsh grass, but it's Spartina alterniflora. I'm sorry, Spartina patens. And you'll see it's much smaller leaved. The blades are smaller.
Hey, Sarah, we did get another question from Christine again.
Yeah.
She was wondering what we should expect to see on the bay over time with climate change and climate disruption.
Yeah. Good question. And so one of the things that we're already seeing, because climate change is happening currently, is that we are seeing the erosion of the banks in many places. This may be partly from multiple effects. We have green crabs in this area now that are more herbivorous, because what happened was we've had green crabs since the early 1800s here, but the green crabs that are here now actually bred with the crabs of Iceland that were brought more recently. And those crabs, the hybrid crab that resulted is very tenacious, and it will eat the roots of plants like the Spartina grass that I'm walking through. And this is what has generally held the banks together in these salt marsh conditions, especially. And so as the crabs are eating the roots of the salt marsh grasses, and the storm events are more significant, we do see more erosion over time. And that causes a number of different problems, because it's not just loss of property, but a very big change in habitat as well. So you get a loss of salt marshes, which are really important in terms of controlling floods and providing habitat for animals and nursery grounds for animals and so forth. So that's one of the big impacts with climate change. And then the other big part of it that we're making a study of, certainly in this area, is coastal acidification. And it's related to climate change because there's less buffering capacity of marine water to buffer against the increase in acidity. So as water warms and other conditions change. So as that happens, we do see a change, and we are seeing changes in acidity in the coastal environment. I hope that
Sarah,
helps.
oh.
So here I am. I've shown you a little bit of the Spartina grass. It's this really beautiful grass that's looks like it's been blown by the wind and trampled by the ocean a bit. There's a lot of crickets living in here. There's also, I'll take you to this. So there's a low spot in the grasses that is holding water a little bit more. And this is sea pickle. It probably looks as big as a tree, but it's actually here only about 8 or 9 inches tall. In the summer, it's this green color, and then in the autumn, it turns a really beautiful deep red and stands out against the green grasses. It is edible. It's a succulent, and it tastes kind of like the ocean. It's very salty, but it's good to eat. The kids like it because it's, it's like eating a pickle or a chip or something. Let's see, I did want to show you. So one of the nice things about exploring in the salt marsh like this, where you've got all this grass, is there will be little low spots that retain the water. And these are the salt pans. And tell me if the background noise of Route 1 gets to be too much here, but I'm going to walk over to one of the salt pans, because there are a number of organisms that use these. And what's amazing about it is they can survive the increased temperature. It's August and it's very hot some of the time. The water level goes way down and temperature goes way up. The salinity goes way up. The pH goes way down. And so and the oxygen levels go way down. So it could be a drastic change in the habitat for these animals. But, and this one's got footprints all around the edge because somebody's been hunting in the salt pan. So let's see if we can see. So here, I think in the middle of the screen, can you make out a footprint in the mud?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty well defined here. There's a long center toe, a short toe, and a short toe on either side. And there's no helix that's discernible in the footprint here, but we should check the other ones. The helix is the 4th toe of the bird's footprint. This is from a bird. There's a helix available, and you can see in that print. So this is some medium-sized bird. It is most likely a crow based on the size and the way the toes are. So crow may have been walking along here looking for some morsel to eat, but most of this is covered in this deep green algae. So you get this deep green slimy stuff here. But what's amazing is there are creatures living in there, and I'm sure I won't be able to show them to you because if you look, the mud is brown and deep. Um, but there'll be even mummy chugs and sticklebacks living in there, which are little fish, and they can survive this kind of environment until the tide turns, comes back in, and refloods this salt pan. There's more crow footprints here. Oh, and this is interesting. So I don't know if you guys can see this, what I'm digging into here. These are little tiny snails. There's just tons of little snails. Each one of those is a little dog whelk, but it's just thick with baby snails. They're all across the surface of this slime. All right, did I make you motion sick when I stood up, Hannah? I'm sorry. I did. All right, I'm gonna walk back across this Spartina patens and the salt marsh, see what else there is to show you along the shore here. It may get a little noisy. I'm gonna be a little close to Route 1 here. Here's a piece of it's actually a piece of a quahog shell. Quahog is a deep water clam, and very likely that was carried here by the water. The seagulls like to pick up the quahogs at low tide, drop them on the rocks nearby, and then the pieces of the shell sometimes get carried around. Here's an interesting little thing that happens sometimes. And I'm going to back up so I can show you. Anybody want to guess how that happened? There's a huge piece of sod that's sitting on top of the salt marsh. I'll kind of walk around.
Is it from an ice flow?
Yeah, exactly. So it was a piece of sod somewhere else. The ice smashed into it, broke it free, and got dropped right here on top of the salt marsh. So it's even got some different plants. It wasn't from right here, that's for sure. It has some Timothy grass growing in it, and then we do have this here. This is the salt marsh goldenrod, but it's a little bit of a different piece of soil. Okay, I'm gonna walk back across the salt marsh. See what else we can find this direction.
So Sarah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Those amphipods we saw, are those the sand fleas that you said might be the fastest animal on Earth?
We didn't actually see any amphipods yet, but I was going to look for some.
Uh,
We saw springtails.
oh,
So
right.
but springtails obviously are not amphipods. But let's look for some amphipods. What Hannah's talking about are these very small, they look like little tiny shrimp animals. There's thousands of species all over the world in different environments, both marine and freshwater. And amphipods are the fastest animal on Earth, which surprises people because everybody thinks a cheetah or a peregrine is. So a peregrine falcon can stoop at 250 miles an hour, which means it dives. So that's through the air. And then a cheetah can run across the landscape, and it can run, I think, around 60 miles an hour. Not sure about that. When it's going its fastest. But an amphipod can go, well, first of all, there's many varieties of amphipods. So the fastest one I know of goes when it jumps. It's just like a sand flea jumping against your leg. When it jumps at about 1,600 miles an hour. But it only goes about 4 inches on a good day. That's why it kind of, feels like they're smacking you when those sand fleas or amphipods, when they smack into your legs on the beach. It's because they are going very fast and they spring with their abdomen. So it's quite a movement. Kind of like a lobster snapping its tail, a little bit like that. Let's see if we can find some amphipods out here in the grasses. I'm gonna find a spot. So here's where there's a bit of a channel that comes in to the salt marsh from the bay, and I'm gonna bring you down right into the mud amongst the grasses here. I see spiders. Let's see. I think it's a little dry right there. Let me find another spot. They want to be a little bit wetter. They're a crustacean, and they do have gills, and so they need to stay wet, or the gills at least need to stay moist, even when they're, at a time when the tide is out and so forth. Oh, there's one, a bright orange one. All right, let's see. Can you guys see a bright orange animal?
Yes.
Let's see. There's some little brown ones too, crawling around in there. I don't know. Could you see that, Hannah?
Yeah, I saw it briefly.
Yeah, it was pretty quick. Let me see if I can find another one that's in a more obvious. They won't be easy to see, but when you come out here on your own, or if you're at the beach, they're super easy to find. Looking at them on my phone isn't going to be easy, but when you come out, just find a place where the dirt is wet and moist. I'm just going to look down here again. I see some shiny beetles and things. And you'll see little tiny shrimp-like animals. You just have to keep in mind that they're, I don't know, the small ones are like a millimeter, and the bigger ones are like, I don't know, 5 or 6 millimeters. So they're pretty small. So one thing I wanted to mention is that, when I said explore the shore, Every shore is very different. So sometimes when I go across the way over there to other parts of Great Salt Bay, I go onto a cobbly, rocky shore. And amongst the rocks, there will be very different animals to find. So here at the salt marsh, there's a set of animals that are associated with the salt marsh, of course. And if you're out on the mud flat, yet again, a different set of animals. So I guess I was vague in my description, but just wanted to point out that, of course, I mean, you all know this from going to different beaches. The sand beach is going to be different from a cobbly beach. And they certainly do have different animals associated with them, as well as different plants. All right, we're just going to go visit one more little area here, and then I think I'll wrap it up probably. Just want to check out, this is part of that stream system that's coming into this part of the marsh. And we've got some standing water. There's some spiders. There's some tiny baby fish. Little tiny fry, probably mummy chugs mostly in there. I'm sure there's insects in there as well. Can you guys see anything moving around in the water?
I can't really make anything out. But if you hold the camera still, we might be able to.
Sorry, I thought I was holding it still.
No.
Oh, I'm gonna move the camera. I want to show you something if I can. Let's see. Can you see the green slime?
Oh, yeah.
Can you see the little amphipod at the base of that plant?
Which plant?
Let me get into a slightly different position to show you. So, oops, he left.
Oh, yep.
There it goes.
I
He
see
broke
him,
the surface
yeah.
tension and he went under the water. Could you see that?
Yeah, but just briefly.
Yeah, it was very quick, but it was an amphipod, and it walked across the surface of the water on top. Oh, it's reemerged. Sorry about the ambulance. Behind me.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see him?
Yeah.
So his little amphipod, he's walking across the water on the algae there, probably just finding things to eat, little bits of plant matter, little animals. They're omnivores. But that's one of those animals that is the fastest animal on Earth, believe it or not. Fortunately, not being fast right now. Or if he's not personally one of the fastest ones, then it's related to one of those. Can you see him at all?
Yes.
It's very cute. He has a little antenna, 10 legs. Looks like a tiny lobster, kind of.
I lost him. Oh.
All right, yeah, I lost him too. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm certainly willing to take any last questions, and then I thought we should wrap it up before I am, too close to Route 1 to be enjoyable here.
Are you seeing any invasive species along the edges of the salt marsh?
That's a good question. Along the edge of the salt marsh, I am seeing birch and sumac and pines, which are all native. Let's go a little bit further this way. Yeah, folks who are listening in, at Coastal Rivers, we are having ongoing and continuous conversations about the management of invasive species, both for private landowners and also within the organization. These are species that don't have predators or disease controls because they come from other places and don't necessarily bring controls with them. But no, right here I see, you know, spirea and other native species. There's some wild rose up there, but I think it's a native one actually. This is all the salt marsh goldenrod, and this is spirea. This is a lovely bush. It's actually a great bush to plant for pollinators. Does very well in all kinds of environments, and it has these lovely little flowers. I don't see pollinators out right now, probably because they're too hot. But, yeah, so this bank is, you know, bank of Route 1, and it's all got spirea on it, which is great. So Hannah, no, it looks good right here. Although I do know that if I was to turn around and go back into the woods, there's a ton of honeysuckle. Yeah, there's a lot of invasive species that are growing along Route 1 in this general vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be the management of that kind of environment is really a big project ongoing, because once you start, you have to keep at it for a number of years to make an impact. But I guess every bit does count. It does help. So can you guys hear the crickets? There's just thick with crickets in here.
Hearing an occasional chirp.
Oh gosh, it's like a cacophony right here. I don't know what they do when the tide comes in. Honestly, they must get out of here because they're not going to be able to swim. They must just go up on the banks. Anyway, for those of you who intend to visit this site, there is this boardwalk that goes across the salt marsh, and it's a great place to visit. It's actually a really great walk for families because the environments are varied. You've got the salt marsh, and you've got the woods, and then there's the middens to visit. So there's a lot to see in a small area. And you can go out and come back, or you can do the loop, which is 3 miles. So I guess I will say thank you very much to everybody for joining us, for exploring the shores of Great Salt Bay.